Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome. My name is Kus, and I am the head of the Central Government Program at Tech UK. And we're really pleased to have you join us today for this webinar on transforming legacy applications into improved service delivery whilst enabling AI. Pleased to know that I am here with a really great panel today, and I'd really like it if everyone would introduce themselves. So let's start with Jason, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Scholes. I'm Chief Technology Officer and one of the founders of Sign Up Solutions. We're a open text partner and a company that's worked in the content management space in public sector for 20 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Pownall. I'm a senior digital specialist at the National Audit Office. So, as I'm sure most of you know, the NAO is the public spending watchdog, and we audit the accounts of central government departments and look at how well they've used their resources for delivering public services. But I'm part of a specialist digital insights team, so we're very interested in how the digital data and technology agenda is playing out in government.
Thanks so much. Last but not least, Simon. Simon Godfrey.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Simon Godfrey. I have a couple of roles. I chair the Public Sector Board at Tech UK, where I work closely with Heather and a wide variety of suppliers into government, which is a thrill every time we do it. And I also manage the interface back into some policy challenging areas into UK government for BT.
Great, thank you. And I'm really pleased that we have all of you joining us on this. I think we're going to have a great discussion today. Just a few quick things before we get started. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists, but we also want to hear from those of you who are watching us and listening and really want to bring you into the conversation. So please note, if you do have any questions for our panel, use the Ask a Question box at the right-hand side of your screen. And then we'll sort of get to your questions near the end of our discussion today. So just to sort of kick things off, I'll do a little bit of scene setting and then we'll get into some questions for our panel. So in the modern era, we produce masses of information on an hourly basis, both structured data and unstructured documents, images, video, etc. Trying to manage this information is becoming increasingly tricky, with different internal parties having different priorities on information management. IT departments are trying to reduce the burden of securely managing the information, concerned with keeping the data within applications in order to keep it valuable, whilst having to upgrade to secure versions, which isn't always possible on older systems. And then you have legal and compliance teams, and they have rules and preferences on keeping certain information for specific periods of time, whilst destroying other information relatively quickly, for example, in compliance with GDPR. And then also we have operational departments, and they generally want to keep all data, retaining high quality information within easy access, and now seeing the value of analytics and AI to provide even more insight into historical information. And so the two key areas for these departments are forecasting outcomes, such as to predict service demand, or in healthcare to predict the development of particular diseases and to act preventatively. And then you also have its use for large language models such as ChatGPT to simply ask questions of systems to receive fast, concise, and accurate answers to better deliver service to the public. So in light of this sort of different parties needing to use information in different ways, we start to think about what does that mean for the legacy systems that are in place, and also this juxtaposition with this new emerging technology with AI and the possibilities that has. So the issue of managing valuable data in aging systems, what do we do about it? Simon, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think you set the scene brilliantly well, actually. That we are in an area, or an era rather, of exponential data growth. And what was, going back just a decade, a series of ones and zeros stored in various file formats for various usage, has grown just massively. Between 2022, just last year, and to 2025, we're going to see a doubling of data to end up around about 190 zettabytes. I think the latest, well, just shy, 181 zettabytes. And if you don't know what a zettabyte is, it's 1,000 exabytes, and you can do the maths backwards from there. I mean, that's a lot of data. Now, you make a great point. The data being used today is firstly, it's generating more. It's more complex than ever before. It's working in a policy construct that, well, we're seeing the edges of the capabilities of those data being exploited more carefully and more creatively. So I do think we're at a serious inflection point from a technology point of view that we clearly cannot turn back from. And with you mentioned it a moment ago, Heather, with the advent of large language models and ChatGPT-4, right, then the only way is more data, right? And the challenges we're all going to face is, pragmatically, how do we get value from that, in a policy construct that has things to do with GDPR as well and compliance? But how do we also make sure that that data is being used for good outputs and outcomes, and that we also use it compliantly, legally, and have a framework that allows us to do good rather than do not so good. So for me, that's the macro challenge I think we face, really. We're in a sea of data. It's getting larger. We need controls around it, but we can't expect to control it. We need to let it sort of organically grow, if data can organically grow, of course.
Great. Thanks so much, Simon. Jonathan, I think I'll bring you in here from the public sector perspective. What challenges do you see?
Well, I'm going to start off with the actual legacy aspects of this, because those of you who've read our reports, and particularly the one that we did a couple of years ago now on the challenges in implementing digital change, we put a timeline diagram in that report. And what we showed is, at that time, you got 25 years of government strategies. So we went back as far as 1996, so government direct prospectus, and then you had information age governments, the early years of New Labour, and you can go right through. And we've got the latest CDDO roadmap that came out last year. And so that's probably the best part of 30 years now, isn't it? And all these strategies for digital and data in government, they've had some remarkably consistent themes to them. So they've all sought to address questions of legacy systems. They've all sought to tackle shared infrastructure, interoperability, joining up data, making the most of it. And then they've also all talked about usability and efficiency. But I think the fact that there's been nearly 30 years of strategies, but the themes have been repeated, just shows how difficult this is a challenge to actually tackle in practice. So in terms of what we're seeing in government, I think there has been a recognition more recently about legacy IT, that and the limitations it's posing for being able to use data well. That is now being addressed, and there's a couple of reports that we've done which have touched on that, which I might come on to later if they come up in questions. But it's a long-standing issue, and I think there's no easy solutions. But I would agree with Simon that yes, technology is now at a point where perhaps there is more that we're capable of doing.
Thanks for that. Jason, I'll bring you in here. What sort of things are on the horizon to start to address this challenge?
Thanks, Heather. Well, in the 25 years or so that I've been sort of working in dealing with legacy data sources, there's been quite an amount of substantial change really in what customers are looking for, but what technology vendors can deliver. Historically, there were a lot of products out there, which I'm sure many of the people on the in this call today have probably witnessed, where they were very much standalone systems that supported the archiving of varying amounts of data, but whether that's unstructured TIFF documents that they were scanning in, or whether this was clinical imagery data used for diagnosis in hospitals, or social care information for local governments. They were very much standalone systems, and this has caused, for many users, not small amounts of anxiety in terms of having to switch between different platforms to kind of see the information that they need to make accurate and positive decisions for the benefit of the people that they're citizens or patients that they're dealing with. Since then, many systems, including those of vendors like OpenText and many of their competitors, have changed. Many of those applications are now far more integrated with the end applications. So whether those are HR systems or electronic patient record systems, content management platforms, for one, are very much a silent partner in many cases. And that's quite important, because quite often the issues of deploying technology are not just actually getting it in place and picking up the points that Simon and Jonathan made about just the infrastructure challenges that many organizations face, that quite often they're looking to solve by moving products to and platforms to the cloud to make them more maintainable, more supportable, more resilient. But they want to make those changes with minimize the effects on their organizational operation. Those are quite often some of the hardest things for companies to deal with. So quite often what you'll find these days, and in many cases with some of the people we've been working with some of the older applications, we see now customers who join together the migration of a platform to the cloud to sort out much of the IT challenges that the organization faces with old hardware, for example, and resilience, joined together with integrating those with social care systems or EPR systems. And that has allowed the technology to be brought in a more seamless way that has prevented the information being left in old platforms. And in so doing, they're releasing value by decommissioning older systems and broadening their access and accessibility too. And I think the last point would be, is really there's an opportunity for many people and organizations to solve some of the problems they have when they look to upgrade those applications. The more data these front-end applications hold, the more difficult it is to upgrade them because of the amount of information. So we see that very much in the healthcare space. So offloading of information from a PAC system that's holding clinical imagery to a back-end archive makes it easier for organizations to move from one vendor to another to gain new features and functions without having to deal with migrating hundreds of petabytes, zettabytes of data that would otherwise be wrapped up in the challenge as well.
Great, thanks for that. Let's start to think about some of the new technology that's out there and how we can get better access to information in new systems and the opportunities for analytics. What are these opportunities, and if departments get these under control, what kind of benefits do they stand to get? Simon, do you want to have a shot at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think the benefits could be myriad and hugely exciting. It's a bit of a passé phrase, isn't it? Data is the new gold or black gold, whatever it is. I think that's very true. I think some of the challenges that we're going to be faced with is when data was less prevalent. And I don't mean it was not prevalent. It was around, clearly. It was useful. Now we're seeing, to my earlier point about just the scale of it, how do you sift through it? How do you make sense of it when it's only going to get more? is that there's going to be volume. What tools and technologies are you going to have to deploy to make sense of the data that you have at your disposal? Because you could actually take, in the very early instances of analysing your data, a 1 degree wrong path, and then after, let's say, a week or a month, using that data to then make your decisions, you could be way off beam and way off track. And I'm thinking particularly around customer service. I'm thinking particularly around even things like benefits. So you all know, Heather, from our conversations, the work that I do, my day role, and I'm obsessed about making sure that the outcomes for citizens are top quality. Unless we have the right tools and techniques and processes and capabilities embedded really from the get-go, we do stand a risk of having substandard services, no matter what the promise of great data could be. So the ability to stratify, analyze, do things on the fly, and approach data in a really different way nowadays is right at our doorstep now, and we need to embrace it. We need to accept the fact we don't know what we don't know. Sometimes that data will give us answers we hadn't even expected. We can't just say that's not relevant, move on. We've got to have the peace and a common sense of mind, I suppose, to look at that data and say, what is that telling us today that we didn't know or hadn't even thought about? So I do think I do like to use analogies. It's a bit like the Wild West or the Gold Rush, and I'm sure every decade people say similar things, don't they? But the reality is, it is a whole new paradigm, really, of the value we can get from data. And my concern, however, to the point eloquently made a moment ago by Jason, is legacy matters, right? And the ability for large organizations of state and others to move off legacy into a new environment where they can maximize the value of that data. I'm naturally always concerned about these things because I see from my day role it's just not moving quick enough.
That is a challenge, I think, that you have just put to Jonathan. Jonathan, how do we get things moving more quickly? Which departments are doing well in this, and sort of which ones might be a little bit?
There's a lot to comment on in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think I'll start with the move to cloud, and I think sometimes I'm not saying anyone on this call is guilty of this, but I can imagine that sometimes people might think, oh great, I've moved my legacy into cloud, and then that's job done. I've improved my data, and that's great. But what we do tend to see a fair bit of, certainly in the central government sector, is what we would call lift and shift, or moving without improving, or as one government CIO called it, it's putting an old car in a new garage. So what that will do, of course, it'll address the immediate concerns about supportability of hardware and platforms. But if you haven't actually substantially re-engineered the applications that are actually running, or the data structures that are there, then you wouldn't really call that transformation. And although I don't particularly want to call out any particular departments, but we did a report on this just before Christmas, and the actual department we looked at was DEFRA, so Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Not because we wanted to target them particularly, but it's a big topic and it's too big to look at across government. But what we saw that their approach was, the idea was it was in 3 phases. It was to stabilize, enhance, and then transform. And as far as they were doing the stabilization, we thought they're doing quite a good job of that. But what we said is that's great from the bottom up, but if you're going to want to do more with your data, how does that fit into the wider transformation agenda at the top? And I think the answer was that was perhaps less well developed. So you had individual business areas doing things from the bottom up that didn't necessarily connect coherently with what was going on at the top. And secondly, moving off legacy, what does it take? And I think you can't ignore the question of cost and affordability. Some of you may have seen a few weeks ago the head of the NAO, the Controller Auditor General, he did a piece in one of the national broadsheets, and it was at the time of the schools crisis, the crumbling concrete, and he said that legacy IT is the technology equivalent of crumbling concrete. So it needs to be addressed. But I think over time in government, we have seen legacy perhaps not given the attention it needs. It has been neglected. There was another government CIO that told us that its legacy is probably, and maintenance is one of the most raidable budgets when money's tight and you need it for other things. And so going back to DEFRA, although they had a program to stabilize, enhance and transform, you then look at the ambition and then compare the funding available, and it kind of runs out somewhere halfway down the enhance bit and not a lot left for transform. And so they're well aware that there's a lot more you can do with data, and the opportunities are there, but it's the difficulties of just getting that impetus to make it happen. So there's not really an easy answer to that one, unfortunately. I mean, if there was, it would be being done, I imagine.
Yeah, you make it very no easy answers, unfortunately. Jason, what about sort of other solutions that are available?
Well, I think there's some very much practical advice I would focus on, and actually, is a point well made, Jonathan, about the problems of legacy information. Is in most cases it's old. The way that it was classified, in many cases, these are systems that we regularly see that are many decades old. The way information was classified then and the tools and technology that was available was very different, and people's level of understanding was different then. And so when information needs to be decommissioned from these old systems, as surely at some point they often do, there's many things that need to be considered. And quite often, if you look at areas like healthcare and local government, just for two, there are some standards-based classification schemes. And these have become very much a focus for the information sharing age, because if the more information you share around the wider world in a region or nationally, in the case of NHS England, there are now many there are programs established for national sharing of information. A common understanding for how you're going to access that information is absolutely critical. You can't have 20 different regions all with a different understanding of how something's identified, because we'll never find information, even if we do have the technology to share it. And so quite often when you're migrating that information, it needs to be reclassified. So for healthcare, we might move it from an old classification scheme, maybe to encompass things like SNOMED CT or local government classification scheme if we're classifying records and things like that, in order to solve some of those problems. And I think picking up on some of the areas that are very much capturing the news in terms of AI. There are many AI tools out there from big vendors and small vendors alike. It's attracted huge amounts of interest, and we go to a lot of events and where we see many of these vendors and have conversations with them. But in terms of the consumer, the things that people really need to focus on, I think, are the exact information that you're looking to capture from documents and information. So by that, I mean, quite often, if we look at letters that maybe a customer service centre is receiving, or a primary care organisation, that information will have information about a citizen or a patient. It could have identifiers on it. It'll have information that classifies the document maybe in terms of medical conditions or physical locations. But those are part of the things that organisations are not only trying to reduce costs from a spend point of view, to have people read through that information and classify it, but and kind of reduce the number of people that's required to deal with all that information. But we need to be able to identify what the actions are, and it's that's quite often forgotten about, that if you don't actually pull out of those documents actually what they're asking you to do, even if you classify the information, you will still need to have people go back and read it. And so if you look at those tools and with the eyes of somebody who's saying what we actually need from those as part of any sort of analysis that you do, then you'll far better be able to identify the sorts of tools that you need in order to deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think that's really key, to make the best of the information and actually store it and model it in a way that will make it useful to the end consumers of that information.
Can I chime in there, Heather?
Yeah, of course, please.
We're talking about structured data, and of course there's a whole panoply of structured and unstructured data. And as Jason was talking, I just wrote down a little note just saying Precambrian explosion. And what I meant by that was, if you remember the diversity at that critical juncture in, the development of our planet, where suddenly everything exploded. And the paradigm was that what went on in the oceans no longer exists today. And here we are today, a very different species. I mean, I know that's taken over a few billion years of time, don't get me wrong, but the parallels being that, we have a dual challenge. We have the structured data challenge, where things have been orchestrated and organized for a long period of time. And we need, as Jason said, to be able to bring that data into a more meaningful and usable format. That's one thing. But we also have the ability now to analyze and use unstructured data as well in a hugely different way. And added to that, you mentioned AI, which is very topic at the moment, but equally, the advent of all things quantum will begin to accelerate the sheer gargantuan volumes of data that we're going to see. So we are at this real inflection point, as I said earlier, to sort out the problems of yesterday and today, but look to the future, not really knowing what life forms are going to, I use that analogy again, are going to be created out of all this data just 20 years from now or 10 years from now, not let alone a billion years from now. So I think we have a really interesting intellectual challenge, one that needs sharp minds and attention to process and detail. And the flip side is those creative individuals who can just look at the picture in front of them and say, I know what I can do with this. I'll create a whole new something or other, whatever that might be. I find that fascinating. I really do.
Oh, I do too, completely. What about sort of issues around data sharing? Are we doing enough of it? Are the systems set up in a way to encourage data sharing in an appropriate and safe way? I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to tackle that.
Well, good question. Well, when Jason was speaking about health and standards-based sharing, I was thinking back to my 25-year timeline diagram, and although it wasn't one of the strategies on it, you had the NHS connecting for health and the information superhighway, which I think dated back to 1998, and I think that had an ambition that you'd have standards-based sharing mandated by contract by about 2005, and of course here we are, best part of 20 years on, and we haven't got that. You mentioned SNOMED CT. I think that was first mandated in around 2012 and still isn't fully in place everywhere, and even the NHS number isn't used universally for various reasons. So it's I think this goes to show that you can have the ambition and the standards, and it's a great idea, but the technology can inhibit, or the legacy technology can inhibit the ability to actually do that. In terms of data sharing, well, on health particularly, I didn't mention it earlier, but we did a report, came out just after the pandemic started, although we'd done the work beforehand, and that was digital transformation in the NHS. And one of the things that we just commented on, not saying it's good or bad, but a lot of different systems in health and all sorts of different systems to talk to each other as part of the one clinical commissioning group in North London, and I looked at their IT map, and I counted across their particular geographical area of North London something like 106 different patient record systems. And when I say different, I mean different vendors. I don't mean two versions of the same system in place at different locations. So that gives an idea of the scale of the challenge. And then of course on standards you've got questions of versions and backward compatibility, all of that. So that there are, when you get into the actual mechanics and nuts and bolts of this, there are just some practical considerations to think about. I know data or just information flowing to where it needs. It's a great ambition. Who wouldn't say that's a good idea, but it's achieving it's a bit trickier.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, I don't know if you had wanted to add anything. I know you brought up sharing as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, there some real tangible progress, I would say. I mean, I was having conversations with NHS England this morning, and they have a programme for national image repository for sharing images on a national basis. It's a programme that's moving forward. They're engaging with suppliers, many suppliers, to understand what industry thinks of their ideas and proposals, and we know that they're planning on moving forward with that activity. And I, look forward to it becoming a reality, because it's clearly an area. There was historically, 25 years ago, many of the content management systems had their own APIs, and they were always very strong and very good at doing integration. But if you're to really join together different vendors, you need them to follow common sets of standards that they can validate and test at a distance, and know that when they come together for particular combinations of deployments, that they will actually work in practice. So I look forward to programs like the National Imaging Repository, which I think builds on their locator service, is going to hopefully, move ahead. Other things that have been around for a while have been vendor neutral archives. So, and this is something else that I would say is a change in the last few years. Historically, when people were looking to do migrations, that they would want to move them from other legacy systems. But some of the integration profiles that are out now allows you to integrate those platforms and actually share them while leaving them in place with where they are. So you can create a repository, you can register information in those, but actually leave the data in terms of structured data or images by those medical records or clinical documents or social care documents, kind of share that stuff without moving it around. And the idea being that reduces some of the challenges that those organisations would otherwise have moving them. There's obviously some dependencies on what those vendors would support, but where those vendors are still are willing to adopt those standards, then they can be kept in place. So we now have things like image networks, and image networks are more about joining together platforms in the healthcare space, for example, with archives really acting as a place where those systems that do need to be retired for reasons of cost or accessibility to solve some of those challenges as well.
Great. I'm not as techie as everyone else on the panel, but that sounds to me, in my layman's terms, like interoperability, right? Like there needs to be the ability for, is that vendor neutral, same thing as interoperability? Or did I get that totally wrong?
No, you're correct. It's correct in that there does clearly need to be strong interoperability for these platforms to work. When you talk about, if people talk about vendor neutral, it's a combination of several things. The first thing is that those interfaces really need to be standards based if they're to interoperate with other vendors, and they certainly should be interoperating. They can't be islands. They don't deploy successfully, so they need to be integrated with the electronic patient records or the PACS vendor systems. They need to play nicely together for that to happen. But it's also about the formats. So when you're capturing information, it needs to be in a format that can be consumed by other vendors. There's not much point in capturing it if the format of the data is not vendor neutral. There are still proprietary issues in there, and those have to be tackled as well. And that was something I was talking to about this morning was that potential very difficult challenge that if we don't, we can sort the interoperability out, but we still need to make sure that then the actual data that we're providing is actually suitable for the purposes that it's going to be used for, and it's readily readable, and people don't have to go out and buy other applications to be able to access that information. I think those two things need to go hand in hand.
Great, thanks for clearing that up for me. I guess maybe shifting gears slightly, what about the role of digital skills? Do we have the kind of skills we need in place to be able to sort of move on from legacy and start to embrace the new the new use of this data? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Can I try
well,
that?
Oh, good. I'm glad both of you.
I'll follow you, Simon.
Are you sure?
I mean-
Okay, I guess. Well, look, I just think, Heather, I'm obsessed about this. We have lengthy conversations. It is the great unknown, isn't it? It's the known unknown. We know there's a gap. We don't know quite what the gap looks like. What platforms we're going to use. I mean, with the advent of, being able to code without coding skills, let's say, through the use of AI tools and technologies, maybe that's all. Maybe we don't need a plethora of skills anymore. Maybe we just need to be able to speak English into a large language model.
Yeah.
Say, write me a piece of code that does this for me. Now, quite how the integrity of that code could be managed, maintained, supported over time is a completely separate set of questions, I know. But actually, it is I think we can predict the skills we need now for the next year or so. But if we look to the end of this decade into 2030, I'm less certain we can really pinpoint skills other than say we need super smart people who've got an ability to analyze stuff. I mean, that's that's a simple view, and I've got lots more thoughts, but I won't burden the panel with them in the moment.
But no, that's quite interesting, and I think sometimes people debate whether is legacy an IT challenge or a skills challenge, and that's, I guess, a slightly different debate. But Jonathan, you were about to come in.
Yeah, so on skills, we look at it from two angles, really. So first of all, you've got at the senior leadership level. I'm speaking central government now. You've got some very talented senior digital people in government, but what we said in our latest report on addressing the barriers is that doesn't necessarily flow through to the other upper echelons of the senior civil service. And I think Cabinet Office and CDDO, the Central Digital and Data Office, they themselves would admit that. At the Public Accounts Committee hearing that followed our report, they said that benchmarking suggests that government's got about half the level of digital and data capability that equivalent organisations would have in the commercial world. So I think there's certainly room for some of those people who've perhaps come up from a less technical, more of a policy background. They really need to know more about digital and just all the complexities and what they're getting into, because ultimately these are the people who are making decisions about transformation and programs and the scope and direction and scale of programs. And then secondly, at a more technical level, I don't think anyone could deny that there's quite a hot market out there and there is something of a skills shortage. CDDO are certainly trying to do some good things to attract skills into government, but those of you who've heard me on events like this before, I point out that we've said similar things in 2011, 2015, 2017, 2019. We've said government recognises there's a skills gap and it's doing things to address it, but whether what's happening will actually be enough to overcome it, I think we would wish government every success, but I would have to say from our perspective, the jury's still out on that.
Yeah, it is a sort of a challenging one, but like you said, it's not just a public sector challenge. That's sort of across the whole country, and it's sort of difficult to predict what the need will be, given the way that the technology has moved on exactly what kinds of digital skills will be required going forward. But there's always going to be a need for that technical expertise, I believe.
Can I chime in? There's been a program of work. You'll be aware, Heather, and colleagues as well, of course, that about it's not really a skills exchange program, but it's a from public sector into private sector organisations. Can we have some of your talented people, please, on secondment for a year? Yeah, and I'd love to do that. I'd love to be able to say, yeah, we've got 25 spare people on the bench that can come and help and build better public services. But the reality is that they may go, don't get me wrong, and I'm sure some of the people in this organisation would want to go. But the reality is we need them, right? We need them to service the needs of our customers across the sector anyway. So there is that dynamic challenge between the yin and the yang of, not just where they feel comfortable. I was lucky. I went into the other side, shall we say, in the early noughties and learnt bundles and hopefully gave bundles of value. But I was only one person. For this to be successful, it needs to be done at scale. So maybe this is another conversation, maybe the model needs to be looked at in a different way rather than just people exchanges and educational programs. Maybe there's a different way to look at it. I don't know the answer, but maybe if we sort of take a step back from the challenge and look at it more holistically, maybe some bright 25-year-old might come up with a solution.
Yeah, and as Jonathan said, this isn't the first time that this has come up as a challenge. He said, the strategies before have all identified skills as an area. So I do think, it definitely, there's always scope for a new approach, a new idea, a new way to tackle a very sticky legacy problem, one that's been around for quite a while.
I was going to say, Heather, that for picking up Simon's comments about low-code solutions. I mean, low-code, I think, is solutions in terms of simplifying the level of complexity of configuring an application, whether it's changing a manual process into a more automated process that is not based on a paper-based form, but is utilizing electronic form, stuff like that. It's very much where low-code solutions have, from vendors like OpenText and others, have established themselves. But those have not just been really, in my view, to address the skill shortage challenges that exist, but they're also to make those systems actually, picking up your point, Simon, to make them deployable at scale. That the systems of yesteryear that were potentially far more complex, required far more expertise to make use of them, and so they very much operated within the IT department. The modern platforms now provide tools for people that are not in the IT department to create those electronic forms and create those processes. And actually, maybe those is the better place to be, because at the end of the day, quite often the IT department does not know how those business processes work in the most effective fashion. That does exist outside the IT technology expertise. And so we can provide those tools and in so doing, make it easier for those processes to be deployed at scale. And actually make those platforms pay for themselves and actually provide a return as well.
Yeah, do you remember the program, The IT Crowd, on Channel 4?
Yeah.
And when they were locked up in the basement, all 3 or 4 of them, looking after the entire IT estate from whichever firm it was at the time. Maybe the IT crowd, to your point, Jess, should be everybody, right? Everybody should have a vested interest in making sure they understand what they need to make their own needs fulfill from their own IT requirements. It can't be at the behest of 5 very smart people buried in a bunker, at the base of the building any longer. I think it's an excellent point, well made. Low code and sometimes no code, I think is probably the way forward to simplify, but it's a journey, because we are, it's almost like, yes, another analogy maybe, sort of swimming down a river and you get caught in the long reeds of the current, literally the current, and you can see the bright shiny horizon with the waterfall, and you need to get there, but you're being held back at the pace. So I think we're in that period of transition. The challenge I see is, from a skills point of view, what skills, to your earlier question, Heather, are going to be redundant? Right? Where do people who've started their university careers today realizing, oh gosh, I won't be relevant in 3 years from now? So it is a different mindset change, I feel, very much. And the tools you talked about, Jason, are absolutely center to that.
I mean, you make a fair point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, if we would maybe focus on the positive ones of those that I think are going to continue to be needed. We might have less people writing code in some of the languages of the that have been used in over history, and there's been throughout technology a move from one language to another. Some have stayed, many have come and gone. But the usability of those systems is still like a key aspect where expertise, in my view, continues to be needed. It kind of picks up the challenges that people still find many IT systems difficult to use, and making them usable is very much the preserve of human beings to actually say, that works really well. I don't think that's being completely cracked, but if we make them more usable, we very much will encourage uptake of systems. There's many a grand project that's been deployed, but because of usability issues, it hasn't been readily accessible. And so making them so is something that I think an increasing number of organizations focus on by engaging with clinicians and actually saying, how is it going to work best for you in radiology or cardiology? How is it going to work best in a customer service environment or HR? They all have different perceptions on these things, and I think that is very much requires human interaction to get that absolutely right and for that to work effectively.
Great, thank you. We're sort of getting towards the end. We have about 13 minutes left, I think. So just going to encourage anyone who's listening, if they do have any questions, a reminder to put that in the Ask Your Question tab. And maybe just come back to Jonathan. You said that if you had some time, you wanted to bring up some of the other reports that you did.
Well, I'm conscious I've not talked very much about AI at the moment.
Right.
And the NAO, we are beginning to look into this. We do have a study underway, actually, on the use of AI in government. If you look on our webpage, we've got a...
Oh.
Are you still there, Jonathan? Oh, dear.
We lost him.
Oh, no.
Whilst we wait for him to come back, can I just make a comment about energy? Right, as compute power gets ever more
notice, and so we're planning to report on this sometime in spring next year. We are looking at it from a government perspective. We're not looking at it from the wider economy.
So it's very early days on that study, but it's interesting just seeing what wider lessons there are from industry in that, and what that's come back with is there's lots of interest and experimentation, and there's undoubtedly huge potential, but what's less clear at the moment is that that's translating into meaningful or lasting business value. And we are seeing, people are saying that you've got questions of skills, which we've talked about, complexity, scalability, and of course data quality, all presenting challenges to adoption. Healthcare is an interesting case because not only in the medical side of things, such as imaging, but potential for AI just to help out with the logistical aspects and scheduling in healthcare. And then, of course, on the financial side, AI's got potential for automating routine inquiries and also detection of fraud and other anomalies. So certainly there's huge potential, but I think, as we said in an earlier report, I haven't mentioned challenges in using data across government. AI is obviously only as good as the data that it's trained on. Yes. And there's that traditional adage, garbage in, garbage out, and AI potentially can multiply that. And one thing I do see, I think people are paying a lot more attention now to data quality and data provenance. So it's good that that's at least recognised. Although how people deal with that is perhaps less clear at the moment.
I'll just chime in. I'll just take a small issue with that, Jonathan, only because I'd like to be a bit contentious. There was a time when it was rubbish in, rubbish out. I get that. And actually, in the early advent of AI, yes, because you're training on various models, but it is pretty much self-learning, right? There's as I said earlier, zettabytes of data now. out there. And if you're asking these tools to trawl their many petabytes and then some of information to come back with, they are self-learning rather than just being trained. They are training themselves, you see. So over time, the hope would be that the watermark would go higher and higher, the quality would get better, but there are absolutely no guarantees of that, because, you know, for every upside there is always a downside. And if you look at the way technology and what happened in the great white sort of hope of 1954, 60s, in the early 70s about technology freeing up mankind to have the summer of 69 all over again, you know, all the way through the world, you know, democratizing information. You look at where we are today with the advent of just the social media brigade, and there is a propensity for information to be used and misused and abused, right? So the AI thing is, I think, hugely more complex. I agree that presently, rubbish in, rubbish out, but in a year's time, we won't even know what's going in, right? Frankly, it's just being sucked into the model and the machine, and the ability to then unstitch and unpick it and understand it will be long gone. So the whole thing about Rishi Sunak's AI summit up in Bletchley last week or the week before was to try and address that. My view is, and you know, maybe I'm being a bit US centric here, the guys and the girls with the deep pockets are the ones who can do it, right? I worry that here in the UK, whilst we've got some fantastic creative talents, brilliant brains, the ability to put the shoulder to the wheel and get stuff done in the time we need to, I worry about. I do. And Heather knows my views because we've shared platforms and conversations on this on broad audience. So, you know, I sort of agree, but then I disagree. I don't mean to be rude in any way, shape or form. That was just my perception.
Did you have something you wanted to comment on, Jason? Because there is something.
I can see there's a question. I was going to say there's a question in the that somebody's asked. So I was going to offer to try and provide an answer.
Oh, please do.
Okay. So I believe, shall I read the question out?
Yeah,
so the question is, how does the proposed transformation approach balance the need for modernization with the inherent risks and challenges associated with altering legacy systems, especially in terms of ensuring data integrity, compatibility with existing workflows, and maintaining service continuity during the transition? A great question. So speaking from my own experience, we have a customer, a local government customer, is one of a few who've been sort of wrestling with the challenge that you've described. And there were two elements that they had in terms of transformation. It's picking up a comment that Jonathan made about cloud transformation. So they were looking to transform in not only the usability of the application and the version of the application. So they were moving from an old version to a more modern version of a platform. But they also wanted to make usability improvements and interoperability improvements to improve access and take up of that platform, as well as moving it to the cloud, which is obviously more of an IT-driven problem. And so the way that they've tackled it, and you know, once we had conversations with them, is really to try and separate those out into different streams. And so there was firstly a move to move the platform to the cloud, and in so doing, update the application to a version which would subsequently allow them to make some of the interoperability and usability changes. But actually, those changes weren't all made at the same time. Clearly, there's a whole bunch of risk in so doing that. So the usability changes were being plotted and planned, but they were not made at the same time. Those changes and the integration changes then followed on. And so there was this step-by-step plan to try and move them through that. In terms of migrating the data, if you are going to migrate the data, there are typically tools out there that provide, they're called ETL tools, so export, transform, and load. They typically take things from a wide variety of sources to wherever you want them to go. It's like a mix and match. And those tools, to be effective, really need quite good validation tools. And then in so doing, you can move data from a legacy system to a new system. You can be doing the history, You can then do a delta as you get close to your changeover, and they will track what's been migrated and what hasn't, so that if there's stuff with data issues as it's being validated, then you can pick those things up, have people in the organization address those, but actually provide a way where, as you get closer to the point where you're going to move over to your live system, of actually dealing with that data, and so in so doing, it provides some sort of continuity so that your business can carry on operating. So there are many different philosophies of kind of how you do those. Those are kind of two that I've certainly had experience of.
I'll just pick up the point on energy in general, if I may. A couple of things. I was going to make a point, and we lost you for about 30 seconds, Jonathan, earlier, but I think we got the gist of what you were saying. I was going to pick up a point about, as we go to quantum, as we go towards AI and data to this, the amount of energy the computing industry is using is also, well, I can't even predict how much it's going to be. And we're pushing the problem upstream if we're using cloud providers. So, let's not forget some of that wider sustainability piece. But to the question itself, there are smart buildings. I'm in the building at the moment. You probably don't know, but the light has gone off. It's very simple, isn't it, really? But at the end of the day, so all throughout this building, all 18 floors of it, it's a smart building, right? But I spoke to somebody this morning on another project entirely, and you could even think about wrapping your building in phytoplankton tubes that flow plankton in water, bluntly, around on the outside of the building, absorbing the light and therefore carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen as well. So some of these technologies are nascent and very new. So smart buildings, I think, is a really great concept that needs smart minds to coalesce around it, software, hardware, and all sorts of technologies. And the office or the hospital of the future, providing the money's there, and that's the challenge, will look remarkably different. The hospital built in my area in 1985, which looks like a bunch of porta cabins stuck together. So I certainly hope that's the case. Be aesthetically more pleasing.
Thanks so much, Simon. I think we're really now seriously drawing to the end of our time together. We have just over 3 minutes left. I think maybe I will allow each of you to maybe give your final thoughts. Maybe we can start with Jonathan.
Okay, so yeah, I think legacy, it's everyone knows the issues. They're quite well rehearsed. I think dealing with them, it's more complicated than people think. It requires time, effort, and funding and persistence, but we would encourage people just to keep chipping away at it. And I think on AI, huge potential, but be aware of the just don't rush ahead without being aware of the things you need to be aware of to take it more cautiously. And certainly in the public sector, some of the ethical use cases of AI you get crunchier issues than you have in the private sector. So that's one of the differences.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe Jason, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think in picking up from a technology perspective, I don't think AI is going to be an all or nothing, solution. Certainly, vendors have started to adopt AI within their platforms. It's very much been, in many cases, like a gradual introduction. Certainly, in terms of critical applications that are out there that are now gaining AI within those platforms. There's certainly those are starting to be providing effective tools, and we have seen applications for use in clinical applications. They've clearly been out there for a while, but for legacy data, I think those tools are going to play an increasing role in not only reducing the cost but improving the accessibility to data and helping with decision making. As you say, Jonathan, there's some roads to travel down before we get to something that really delivers on the promise.
Agreed. Simon.
Yeah, so I just a couple of quick points. One's technical, one's human. I think AI is a bit like tulip mania. of the 1700s. It's blossoming, exploding, and different varieties are happening, and of course, and they'll continue to evolve, and some will die and some will survive. We're not just talking about large language models, we're talking about how AI is used in decision making as well within operations. That's fundamentally a really critical path for even to how energy is used. So I think the whole AI tulip mania bubble will burst at some point, but not for any time yet. But my final point, I wrote a piece recently for the Reform think tank about the human sort of qualities we need for the future. Capability, we need capacity, and we need a bit of courage, really, across the sectors. Right, we need to know what capabilities are in the right place. To the skills question. But secondly, the capacity. Have we individually got the capacity to change quickly enough? Probably not. We need to collaborate a bit better. And then the last point, which is the hardest of all, have we got the courage collectively as public and private sector professionals to come together to solve what will be a fundamentally really existential problem to solve, but really worth solving. So the them and us of, and again, Heather, this, of procurement battling going on. Yes, I understand you've got to get value for money for the taxpayer, but I think where we are today with the rapid advancement of technologies, we do need to think slightly differently about how we get maximum value out of the people who turn up at the party. Final point.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And really, thanks to all of you for really a great discussion this afternoon. I think, we've covered quite a few different topics and really delved into, I think the more you discuss it, the more you realize, gosh, this isn't really as straightforward as it might seem to be, just solve legacy and employ AI. But no, it's a very complicated topic. And I think we've had a really interesting and varied discussion today. I'd also like to thank those of you who have listened to us and have joined in the discussion, have asked your questions. If you did, I noticed there was somebody with their hand up and we didn't get a chance to get to that hand. So if anyone has any further questions, you can email. I'm going to just pull up the email address here. Email events@cognitivepublishing.com, and they will forward on the question to us and we'll endeavor to get back to you. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention and your participation, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.